Jake Morrison sat in the small trading room, looking at the numbers on his screen. The Zephyrian trader across from him had 4 arms and was using all of them to point at different parts of their deal. Jake had been doing this job for 3 years now, and he still found it strange to talk business with aliens who looked like giant purple spiders. "A grain shipment will arrive next week," Jake said, keeping his voice calm. 2 million tons, just like we agreed. The Zephyrians. 8 eyes blinked in a pattern that meant agreement. Jake had learned to read their basic signals, though he still needed a translator for the complex stuff. Trade talks were usually simple. Food for metal, metal for fuel, fuel for technology. It was how humans had built their place in the galaxy. Jake's communication device buzzed. He looked at it and saw a message from Lisa Parker, his partner in the diplomatic office. The message was short. Emergency. Council summons. Now. Jake's stomach dropped. The Galactic Council only called emergency meetings when something was very wrong. The last time they had done this, 2 species had gone to war over mining rights. Before that, it was the plague that had killed millions on the outer worlds. "I need to go," Jake told the Zephyrian. "We can finish this later." The alien's eyes blinked in confusion, but Jake was already standing up. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. His boots made loud sounds on the metal floor of the space station as he walked quickly toward the main hub. Nexus Prime was the biggest space station in known space. It floated in neutral territory, where no single species controlled it. The station had been built by 12 different alien races working together, and it showed. Some hallways were tall and narrow for the bird-like Altarians. Others were wide and low for the crawling reptilians. Humans had to duck in some places, climb stairs, and others. Jake made it to the central lift when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw 2 Krillian guards walking toward him. Krillians were big, mean-looking creatures with gray skin and too many teeth. They were also the Council's police force. "Human Jake Morrison," one of them said in broken English. "You come with us?" "I was already coming," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lisa Parker sent me a message." "No message," the other guard said. "Council orders. You come now." Jake felt his heart speed up. This was not normal. When the Council wanted to talk to humans, they usually asked nicely. They sent official invitations with fancy writing and gave people time to prepare. They did not send armed guards to collect people like criminals. The guards walked on both sides of Jake as they took the lift to the government levels. Other people in the lift moved away from them. Jake noticed that some of the aliens were staring at him with what looked like fear or anger. A small Etherian in its crystal container actually moved to the far side of the lift. "What's this about?" Jake asked the guards. "Council will explain," was all they said. The lift stopped at level 7, where the government offices were. Guards led Jake through hallways filled with busy aliens carrying documents and talking in their various languages. Some stopped talking when they saw Jake pass by. Others pointed at him and whispered to each other. Jake had been to the Council chambers before, but always for normal business. Trade agreements, shipping disputes, minor problems between humans and other species. The kind of stuff that got solved with paperwork and handshakes. This felt different. The guards stopped at a security checkpoint. A Morvani officer with blue skin and no hair scanned Jake with some kind of device. The machine beeped several times. "Remove all communication devices," the officer said in perfect English. "Remove all recording equipment. Remove all data storage." Jake handed over his tablet, his communication device, and his personal recorder. The officer put them in a sealed box and gave Jake a receipt. "This is unusual," Jake said. "I'm a diplomat. I have rights." "Emergency session," the officer replied. Special rules. The guards led Jake through 3 more checkpoints. At each one, he had to give up more of his belongings. His jacket went in one box, his watch in another. Even his pen was taken away. By the time they reached the final door, Jake felt almost naked. The door was huge, made of some kind of metal that seemed to change color as Jake looked at it. Ancient symbols from different species were carved into its surface. Above the door, words in 12 languages said the same thing. Galactic Council, Chamber of Justice. Jake's mouth went dry. A Chamber of Justice was not where they held normal meetings. It was where they put people on trial. One of the guards pressed his hand against a scanner. The door made a sound like thunder and began to open. Bright light spilled out, and Jake could hear voices from inside. Lots of voices, all talking at once in different languages. Move, the guard said, pushing Jake forward gently but firmly. Jake stepped into the chamber and stopped. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to go up forever. Seats arranged in a circle held representatives from what looked like every species in the galaxy. Jake had never seen so many different kinds of aliens in one place. At the center of the circle was a single chair. It was clearly meant for a human, and it was clearly meant for him. As Jake walked toward the chair, the voices in the room got quieter. By the time he sat down, the chamber was completely silent. Hundreds of alien eyes were staring at him from every direction. A voice spoke from somewhere above him. Using the translation system, it could be heard in any language. Human Jake Morrison, the voice said. You have been called before this emergency session of the Galactic Council to answer for the actions and doctrines of your species. Jake looked up and saw High Arbitrator Vexthari of the Morvani floating in a special chair near the ceiling. The blue-skinned alien was known for being fair but strict. If he was running this session, it meant the council was taking whatever. This was very seriously. What are the charges? Jake asked, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. Charges will be presented shortly, Vexthari replied. You will have the chance to respond. The future of human participation in galactic society may depend on your answers. Jake felt the weight of those words. He was not just here for himself. He was here for every human in space, for every human colony, for every human child who might one day travel to the stars. He looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the faces of creatures from dozens of worlds. Some looked angry, some looked scared, and some looked sad. None of them looked friendly. Jake took a deep breath and waited for whatever was coming next. High Arbitrator Vexthari's voice filled the chamber as he began to speak. His words were translated into dozens of languages at once, creating a strange echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The Galactic Council has gathered today to address a growing concern about human influence in civilized space, Vexthari announced. Evidence has been collected by multiple species, showing that humans are spreading dangerous ideas that threaten the peace we have worked so hard to build. Jake felt his heart pounding, but he kept his face calm. Around him, alien representatives shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, eager to hear what would happen next. Others seemed uncomfortable, as if they did not want to be part of this. The first speaker will be Ambassador Kethfor of the Altarian Republic, Vexthari said. A tall, thin creature with feathers instead of hair stood up. The Altarian had a long neck and moved like a bird. When he spoke, his voice was high and sharp. Fellow council members, Kethfor began, we have watched with growing alarm as human culture spreads through our territories. Young Altarians who have been exposed to human entertainment and education are beginning to ask disturbing questions. The ambassador activated a holographic display that showed images Jake recognized. There were clips from human movies, pages from human books, and even children's cartoons. All of them showed humans fighting, dying, or sacrificing themselves for others. "Look at this," Kethver said, pointing to a scene from an old war movie. "Humans teach their children that it is good to die for your friends. They make stories about people who throw themselves into danger to save others. They sing songs about soldiers who never come home." Jake watched as more images appeared. Battle scenes from human history, stories of people who had died to save others, even fairy tales where the hero had to give up everything to help someone else. "This is what humans call entertainment," Kethvar continued. "They watch these stories for fun. They teach them to their children as lessons about how to be good people." "What civilized species does this?" Murmurs went around the chamber. Jake could see that many of the aliens were nodding in agreement. The Altarian sat down, and another representative stood up. This one was a reptilian, with green scales and yellow eyes. Jake had dealt with reptilians before, and knew they were usually practical creatures who cared more about profit than politics. If they were part of this, the situation was worse than he had thought. "I am Speaker Hishtak of the Reptilian Concordat," the creature said in a voice like grinding stone. "We have done business with humans for many years. We thought we understood them. We were wrong." The holographic display changed to show human military training videos. Jake recognized some of them from his own time in the Earth Defense Force. They showed soldiers learning to put their mission before their own safety, to protect their teammates, even if it meant getting hurt. Humans train their warriors to accept death, Hishtak said. Not just to risk it, but to accept it as normal. They have a saying, "No one left behind." Do you know what this means? It means they would rather die than abandon a single person. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Jake heard gasps and exclamations of disbelief in languages he did not recognize. To these species, the idea of choosing death over abandonment was apparently horrifying. But it gets worse, Hishtak continued. They do not just accept death for themselves, they expect it from others. Human leaders send their people into danger, knowing some will not return. And the people go willingly. They volunteer for dangerous missions. They compete for the chance to risk their lives. A new speaker stood up. This one was an Etherian, a being made of pure energy contained in a crystal shell. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music played through water. "I am Harmony of Distant Stars, speaking for the Etherian Collective," it said. "We have studied human culture for decades, trying to understand their rapid expansion through space. What we found disturbed us greatly." The holographic display changed again. This time it showed human colonies, human ships, and human settlements spreading across the galaxy. But the images were marked with red symbols showing battles, accidents, and disasters. Humans expand into space, knowing that many will die, the Etherian continued. They send families to dangerous worlds. They build colonies in places where the environment can kill them. They take risks that no sensible species would take. And when people die, they do not stop. They keep going. They say the dead would have wanted it that way. Jake felt sick. He was starting to understand how human behavior looked to these aliens. To species that had learned to avoid death, to minimize risk, to keep everyone safe, humans must seem like madmen. They have ceremonies for their dead, the Etherian went on. They build monuments to people who died doing dangerous things. They tell stories about these people to their children. They make death seem like something to be proud of. More speakers took turns. The Morvani representative talked about human sports, where people regularly got hurt for entertainment. The Zephyrian delegate showed recordings of human rescue workers running into burning buildings and sinking ships. The Krillian speaker displayed human medical records, showing people who had donated organs to save strangers, even when it put their own lives at risk. Each piece of evidence made humans sound more and more like a species, obsessed with death and sacrifice. Jake could see the fear in the aliens' faces as they listened. To them, humans were not heroes. They were a dangerous cult that had somehow gained access to space travel. The final speaker was a creature Jake had never seen before. It was tall and thin, with silver skin and no visible eyes. When it spoke, its voice was so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear. "I am Mindwalker Senth of the Void Dwellers," it said. "We exist in the spaces between stars. We see things others cannot see. We have watched humans spread through space, and we have seen something that frightens us." The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation systems seemed to be holding their breath. "Humans do not just accept death," Senth continued. "They have turned it into a virtue. They believe that dying for others is the highest form of love. They teach their children that some things are worth dying for. They have created a culture where sacrifice is not just acceptable, but expected." Jake felt the weight of all those alien eyes on him. He wanted to stand up and explain, to tell them that they were missing the point. But he also knew that anything he said right now would only make things worse. "Worst of all," Senth said, "they are spreading this belief to other species. Young people from our worlds are starting to ask why they should not be willing to die for their friends. They are questioning why their elders choose safety over service, comfort over sacrifice." Senth paused, letting the words sink in. "They are teaching the galaxy that some things are more important than life itself. This is not just dangerous. It is a poison that could destroy the peace we have built. If other species start to believe that death is acceptable, that sacrifice is noble, that some causes are worth dying for, then we will see wars like the galaxy has never known." The chamber exploded in noise. Representatives from dozens of species were shouting, arguing, and demanding to be heard. Some seemed to agree with the speakers, while others appeared to be defending humans. Jake could not understand most of what was being said, but he could feel the fear and anger in the air. High Arbitrator Vexthari raised his hand for silence. It took several minutes for the chamber to quiet down. "Human Jake Morrison," Vexthari said, "you have heard the evidence against your species. You have seen how your culture appears to the civilized galaxy. We are not here to judge your people as evil or good. We are here to decide whether human beliefs are compatible with galactic peace." Jake stood up slowly. His legs felt weak, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "I would like to respond to these charges," he said. "You will have that opportunity," Vexthari replied. "But first, this council must decide whether humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. If we determine that your culture is too dangerous to be allowed to spread, we will have no choice but to restrict human activity in space." Jake felt the runes spinning around him. They were not just putting him on trial. They were putting all of humanity on trial. And from what he had heard, the jury had already made up its mind. Jake stood in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching him. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. He knew that whatever he said next could change the future for every human in space. "Honorable members of the council," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation system. "I have listened to your concerns about human culture. I understand why our ways might seem strange and dangerous to you, but I believe there has been a misunderstanding." High Arbitrator Vexthari leaned forward in his floating chair. "Speak, human, but know that we have seen the evidence. We have watched your people spread their doctrine of death across the galaxy." Jake took a deep breath. "That is exactly the misunderstanding I want to address. You call it a doctrine of death. We call it something very different." He looked around the chamber, trying to make eye contact with as many representatives as possible. May I ask you all a question? In your cultures, what is the greatest act of love? The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The Altarian representative, Kethver, stood up again. Love does not require death, human. Love is about creating life, protecting life, preserving life. Your question makes no sense. That is where you are wrong, Jake replied. Love sometimes does require death, not because we want to die, but because we want others to live. The reptilian speaker, Hishtak, hissed loudly. This is exactly what we mean. You speak of death as if it is a good thing. No civilized species thinks this way. Jake shook his head. You are hearing my words, but you are not understanding my meaning. We do not love death. We love life so much that we are willing to give up our own so that others can keep theirs. The Etherian representative, harmony of distant stars, pulsed with different colors as it spoke. Explain this contradiction, human. How can you love life by choosing death? Jake thought about how to explain something that seemed so obvious to him but was clearly impossible for these aliens to understand. Let me tell you a story, he said. A simple story that every human child knows. We do not need more stories about human warriors dying in battle. The Morvani representative interrupted. This is not about warriors, Jake said. This is about a mother. The chamber grew quiet again. Jake could see that he had their attention. A mother is walking with her child near a busy road, Jake began. The child runs into the street without looking. A large vehicle is coming fast. The mother has two choices. She can save herself and watch her child die, or she can push her child to safety and be hit by the vehicle herself. Jake paused, looking around the chamber. Every human mother would choose to save her child. Every human father would do the same. This is not because we love death. It is because we love our children more than we love our own lives. But why? Asked the Void Dweller representative Senth. Why not use technology to stop the vehicle? Why not build barriers to keep children safe? Why choose death when life is possible? Sometimes technology fails, Jake replied. Sometimes barriers are not enough. Sometimes the only thing standing between the innocent and harm is one person's willingness to sacrifice. The Zephyrian delegate spoke up, all 8 eyes blinking rapidly. But this is inefficient. If the parent dies, the child grows up without protection. Better to let the child die and make more children. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The casual way the alien spoke about letting children die showed him just how different these species were from humans. That is exactly what I am talking about, Jake said. You see life as something that can be replaced. We see each life as unique and precious. Every human child, every human person is irreplaceable. We would rather die than let them be lost. Speaker Hishtak stood up again. But you apply this thinking to strangers, not just your own children. Your soldiers die for people they have never met. Your rescue workers risk their lives for people from other worlds. This is not natural behavior. To us, it is the most natural behavior in the universe, Jake replied. Every human life has value. Every person deserves to be saved. If I can save someone by risking my own life, then that is what I should do. The chamber filled with arguing voices. Jake could hear representatives from different species debating among themselves in their own languages. Some seemed angry, others confused, and a few appeared to be thinking seriously about what he had said. High Arbitrator Vexthari called for silence. Human Morrison, you speak of human behavior as if it is noble. But look at the results. Your people fight wars. They die in accidents that could be prevented. They take risks that no sensible species would take. How is this good? Jake felt frustration rising in his chest. Because some things are more important than safety. Some things are more important than our own lives. Like what? Demanded the Etherian representative. Like freedom, Jake said. Like protecting the innocent. Like keeping promises. Like love. Abstract concepts, hissed the reptilian. Ideas that exist only in the mind. Not worth dying for. They are not abstract to. U.S., Jake replied. They are the most real things in the universe. A human who breaks a promise to save his own life is not considered a hero. He is considered a coward. The Altarian representative spread his feathered arms. But what good is a dead hero? What purpose does a dead promise keeper serve? Jake looked directly at the bird-like creature. A dead hero inspires others to be heroes. A dead promise keeper shows others that promises matter. When someone dies for their principles, they make those principles stronger for everyone else. This is exactly what we fear, said Mindwalker Senth. You are teaching the galaxy that ideas are worth dying for. Young people from our worlds are beginning to believe this. They are willing to risk everything for concepts that their elders know are not real. But they are real, Jake insisted. Love is real. Justice is real. Honor is real. These things matter more than living to be old. The chamber erupted in chaos again. Representatives were shouting at each other, at Jake, and at the High Arbitrator. Some were demanding that humans be banned from space immediately. Others were arguing that humans had the right to their own beliefs. Jake noticed that several species were not participating in the argument. They were sitting quietly, watching and listening. He wondered what they were thinking. Vexthari finally restored order. Human Lorison, your words only confirm our fears. You admit that humans value abstract ideas more than life itself. You admit that you spread these beliefs to other species. You admit that you see death as acceptable when it serves your purposes. I admit that we value some things more than our own lives, Jake said. But I do not admit that this makes us dangerous. It makes us human. And that is the problem, said the Morvani representative. You are making others want to be human too. You are spreading a disease of sacrifice that threatens the peace of the galaxy. Jake felt his heart sinking. Nothing he had said was getting through to them. They could not understand that humans did not choose death because they loved dying. They chose death because they loved living so much that they would give up their own lives to protect life for others. May I make one more attempt to explain? Jake asked. Vexthari nodded. Speak, but be brief. This council has heard enough words. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, thinking. Then he opened them and spoke directly to the chamber. You have all built perfect societies, he said. You have eliminated war, disease, poverty, and danger. You have created worlds where no one needs to suffer or die. This is a great achievement. He paused, looking around the chamber. But we humans come from a world that was not perfect. We come from a place where people did suffer and die. We learned that in an imperfect world, the only way to protect good things is to be willing to sacrifice for them. But you are in space now, protested the Zephyrian delegate. You can build perfect worlds, too. You can eliminate the need for sacrifice. We can try, Jake agreed. But what happens when perfection fails? What happens when the technology breaks down, when the barriers fall, when the safe systems stop working? What happens when evil comes from outside your perfect worlds? The chamber was quiet now, listening. When that happens, Jake continued, you will need people who are willing to stand between the good and the bad. You will need people who value other things more than their own lives. You will need people who are willing to sacrifice. And you think that should be humans? Asked Vexthari. I think it should be anyone who understands that some things are worth dying for, Jake replied. But yes, humans are ready to do that job. We have always been ready. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one felt thoughtful rather than hostile. Jake could see that at least. Some of the representatives were considering his words, but he also knew that consideration was not enough. These species had built their entire civilizations on the idea that death was always avoidable, that sacrifice was always unnecessary. Asking them to accept human beliefs was like asking them to abandon everything they had worked for. Jake realized that words alone would not be enough to bridge this gap. He needed to show them something they could not argue with. He needed to show them the heart of human belief, and he thought he knew how to do it. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device that the guards had missed during their search. It was his personal music player, something so simple and harmless that they had not thought to take it away. The device was old, a gift, from his sister before he left Earth for his first assignment in space. "Honorable Council members," Jake said, holding up the device, "you have asked me to explain human doctrine. You have demanded to know why we believe some things are worth dying for. I have tried to explain with words, but words are not enough." High Arbitrator Vexthari leaned forward in his floating chair. "What is that device, human?" "It contains something that every human child learns," Jake replied. "Something that shapes how we think about life, death, and love. If you truly want to understand human doctrine, you need to see this." Several representatives began to object. The reptilian speaker Hishtak hissed loudly. "We do not need more examples of human violence or death worship." "This is not about violence," Jake said. "This is about the reason behind everything you have seen. This is about why humans are willing to sacrifice." The Etherian representative, Harmony of Distant Stars, pulsed with curious colors. "Show us, human. But be warned that if this is another attempt to spread your dangerous ideas, it will only make things worse for your species." Jake activated the device. A small holographic projector built into the player created a simple image in the air above his head. The image showed a modest room with simple furniture. In the room stood a little girl, no more than 6 years old, with brown hair and a bright smile. "This is my niece, Emma," Jake said quietly. "She is back on Earth, safe with her family." This recording was made 2 years ago. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the translation systems seemed to be holding their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. The little girl in the hologram began to sing. Her voice was clear and sweet, the way only a child's voice can be. The words were simple, the melody gentle and familiar to any human who had ever been to church or Sunday school. "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong." The song lasted exactly 12 seconds. When it ended, the hologram faded away, and Jake put the device back in his pocket. The silence that followed was the deepest Jake had ever experienced. It was not just quiet in the chamber. It was as if the entire space station had stopped breathing. Even the background hum of the air circulation system seemed to have gotten quieter. Then, slowly, Jake began to notice movement in the chamber. The Altarian representative, Kethvar, was backing away from the center of the room. His feathered face had gone pale, and his long neck was trembling. "No," Kethvar whispered. "No, this cannot be true." The Etherian representative began to flicker and fade. Its crystal container was still there, but the energy being inside was becoming dimmer and dimmer. "They believe." Harmony of Distant Stars said, its musical voice now barely audible. "They believe someone already." The Void Dweller representative, Senth, actually stepped backward so quickly that he nearly fell. His silver skin had turned almost white, and his tall form was shaking. "This explains everything," Senth said. "Everything we have seen, everything we feared. They are not teaching death. They are teaching imitation." One by one, 5 species began to leave the chamber. The Altarians were the first to go, their delegation filing out in complete silence. The Etherians simply faded away, their crystal containers becoming empty shells. The void dwellers followed, moving like ghosts through the chamber doors. The reptilians and the Morvani stayed, but Jake could see that they were shaken. Speaker Hishtak was staring at Jake with new eyes, as if seeing him for the first time. "Your species," Hishtak said slowly, "believes that divinity itself chose to die for them." "Yes," Jake replied simply. "And this is why you are willing to die for others," said the Morvani representative. "You are not following a doctrine of death. You are following an example of love." Jake nodded. "Every human child learns that song. Every human grows up knowing that the greatest act of love in our history was someone choosing to die so that others might live. Not in war, not in conquest, but in love." High Arbitrator Vexthari's voice was barely above a whisper. "Your entire species' willingness to sacrifice. It is not barbaric. It is imitative. We learned from the best," Jake said. "When you truly believe that someone loved you enough to die for you, it changes how you see everything. It changes how you see sacrifice, how you see death, how you see love itself." The Zephyrian delegate, who had remained silent during the exodus of the other species, finally spoke. All 8 of his eyes were focused on Jake, and they had stopped their usual rapid blinking. "This is why you fight so fiercely for others," the Zephyrian said. "This is why you cannot abandon your principles. This is why you consider some things worth dying for." "Yes," Jake replied. "We do not seek death. We seek to follow the example that was set for us. We seek to love others the way we believe we were loved." The remaining representatives sat in stunned silence. Jake could see that they were struggling to understand something that was completely foreign to their way of thinking. "The 5 species that withdrew," said the Krillian representative, speaking for the first time in a subdued tone. "They understand now. They realize they have not been dealing with a species that glorifies death. They have been dealing with a species that was taught the ultimate definition of love." Jake looked around the chamber at the representatives who remained. "We do not seek to spread our beliefs through force or fear. We simply live according to what we believe is the greatest truth in the universe, that love is stronger than death, and that sometimes the greatest victory comes through sacrifice." "But the young people from our worlds," protested the Morvani representative. "They are beginning to believe as humans do. They are willing to risk everything for abstract concepts." "They are not abstract to us," Jake said. "Love is not abstract. Justice is not abstract. Honor is not abstract. These things are real because someone real died to prove they were worth dying for." The Etherian containers that had been abandoned by their energy beings began to glow softly, as if responding to Jake's words. The remaining representatives noticed this and looked at each other with uncertainty. "What happens now?" asked vexed HRI. Jake spread his hands. "That depends on you. We humans will continue to live according to our beliefs. We will continue to value some things more than our own lives. We will continue to be willing to sacrifice for others. This is who we are. This is who we will always be." "And if we try to stop you?" asked the Krillian representative. Jake met his gaze steadily. "Then you will prove exactly what we believe, about the value of freedom and the importance of standing up for what is right." The chamber fell silent again. Jake could see that the remaining representatives were thinking hard about what they had learned. Some of them looked frightened, others looked confused, and a few looked thoughtful. Finally, Vexthari spoke. "Human Morrison, this session is suspended pending further deliberation. You will return to your quarters and await our decision." Jake nodded and began to walk toward the chamber doors. As he reached the exit, he turned back to look at the remaining representatives. "Honorable council members," he said, "I hope you will remember that we humans learned our doctrine from someone who loved us enough to die for us. Everything we do in memory of that love." As Jake left the chamber, He could hear the representatives beginning to talk among themselves in hushed voices. Some were arguing, others were asking questions, and a few were sitting in thoughtful silence. Jake knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The 5 species that had withdrawn would need time to process what they had learned. The ones that remained would need to decide whether they could accept a species whose entire worldview was based on sacrificial love. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Jake felt hope. They finally understood. The aliens had not been dealing with a species that loved death. They had been dealing with a species that had learned love from someone who conquered death itself. As Jake walked through the corridors of the space station, he noticed that other beings were looking at him differently now. Word of what had happened in the chamber was already spreading. Some aliens stepped aside as he passed, not out of fear, but out of something that might have been respect. Jake reached his quarters and sat down on his bed. He pulled out the music player and looked at it for a long moment. Such a simple device, containing such a simple song. But that song had just changed the course of galactic history. He thought about Emma, his niece, safe back on Earth. She had no idea that her innocent voice singing an old Sunday school song had just explained humanity to the galaxy. She would probably never know that her simple faith had helped save the human race from exile. Jake smiled and put the device away. Tomorrow, the council would make their decision. But tonight, he would rest knowing that the truth had finally been told. The galaxy now understood that humanity's greatest strength came not from a love of death, but from being loved by someone who had conquered death itself. The stars outside his window seemed brighter somehow, as if they too understood that something important had changed. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer in question. It was. Jake woke up to the sound of his door chime. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts about what the council might decide. The soft artificial morning light of the space station was filtering through his small window, and he could see ships moving in the distance like tiny stars. He opened the door to find Lisa Parker standing there with a worried expression on her face. She was holding a data pad and looked like she had not slept at all. "Jake," she said, stepping into his quarters. "I have been monitoring the council communications all night. Something big is happening." Jake sat down at his small table and gestured for Lisa to join him. "What kind of something?" 5 species have officially withdrawn from the proceedings," Lisa said, reading from her data pad. "The Altarians, the Etherians, the Void Dwellers, the Celestial Wanderers, and the Deep Thinkers. They are not just leaving the session, they are leaving the station entirely." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Are they preparing for war?" "No," Lisa sighed, shaking her head. "That is the strange part. They are not mobilizing their fleets. They are not making threats. They are just leaving. Their ambassadors sent identical messages to the council. All they said was that they needed time to reconsider their understanding of sacrifice and love." Jake thought about the little girl's song and the effect it had on the chamber. They understood something yesterday, something that scared them. "What happened in there?" Lisa asked. "The reports I am getting do not make sense. They say you showed them a recording of a child singing, and 5 species just walked out." Before Jake could answer, his door chime sounded again. This time it was a Krillian guard, but not one of the ones who had escorted him yesterday. This guard looked nervous and kept glancing around as if he expected trouble. "Human Morrison," the guard said. "High Arbitrator Vexthari requests your presence in the private chambers." Immediately, Jake and Lisa exchanged glances. A private meeting was either very good news or very bad news. Jake followed the guard through the corridors, noting that the station seemed quieter than usual. Many of the normal crowds were missing, and the few aliens he saw were talking in hushed voices. The private chambers were much smaller than the main council hall. Only a handful of representatives were present, including Vexthari, the Morvani delegate, the Zephyrian speaker, and Speaker Hishtak from the Reptilian Concordat. They all looked tired and troubled. "Human Morrison," Vexthari said as Jake entered. "Please sit. We need to discuss what happened yesterday." Jake took the offered chair, noting that this time he was not surrounded by guards or treated like a prisoner. The mood in the room was serious, but not hostile. "The departure of 5 species has created a crisis," Vexthari continued. "They were some of our most influential members. Their withdrawal has raised questions about the stability of the entire council. I am sorry if my words caused problems," Jake said carefully. "Your words did not cause problems," said the Morvani representative. "They revealed truths that we were not prepared to face." The Zephyrian delegate leaned forward, all 8 eyes focused on Jake. "We have spent the night researching human religious beliefs. What we found has shaken us to our core." Speaker Hishtak spoke next, his voice softer than Jake had ever heard it. "We understand now why humans behave as they do. Your entire species was shaped by the belief that the creator of the universe chose to die for you." "Yes," Jake said simply. "And this is why you are willing to die for others," Vexthari said. "You are not following a doctrine of death. You are following an example of love so profound that it changed your entire species." Jake nodded. "Every human child learns that they are loved by someone who gave up everything for them. When you grow up believing that, it changes how you see sacrifice. It changes how you see love itself." The Morvani representative stood up and walked to the window. The 5 species that withdrew understood this immediately. They realized that they had not been dealing with a dangerous cult. They had been dealing with a species that models itself after divine love. But they could not handle that knowledge, added the Zephyrian. For species that have built their entire civilizations on avoiding death, the idea that death could be an act of love is too much to accept. Jake thought about this. What about the rest of you? Can you accept it? The representatives looked at each other. Vexthari spoke first. "We have been discussing this all night," he said. "We have come to realize that the galaxy needs species. Like humans, we have built perfect worlds where no one needs to sacrifice. But what happens when perfection fails? What happens when external threats come that our technology cannot handle? You will need people who understand that some things are worth dying for," Jake said, repeating what he had said the day before. "Exactly," said Speaker Hishtak. "We have been so focused on eliminating the need for sacrifice that we forgot what to do when sacrifice becomes necessary." The Morvani representative turned back to face Jake. "Your species represents something we lost long ago. You represent the willingness to put others before yourself, even when it costs everything." "But we also represent something that frightens many species," Jake replied. "The idea that love might require sacrifice is terrifying to people who have never had to face that choice. Which is why we need to be careful about how we proceed," Vexthari said. "The 5 species that withdrew are not enemies of humanity. They are simply not ready to understand what humanity represents." Jake felt a spark of hope. "Are you saying that the Council will not restrict human activity in space?" "We are saying more than that," the Zephyrian delegate said. "We are saying that humanity has a vital role to play in the galaxy. You represent values that the rest of yous have forgotten. You represent the willingness to sacrifice for others that might be necessary for our survival. But," added the Morvani representative, "we also need humanity to understand that not all species are ready for your example. Some will see your willingness to die for others as beautiful. Others will see it as terrifying." Speaker Hishtak leaned back in his chair. "The young people from our worlds who have been influenced by human culture are not being corrupted. They are being awakened to possibilities that their elders forgot existed." "The question," said Vexthari, is whether we can find a way for humanity to coexist with species that do not share your beliefs about sacrifice and love. Jake thought about this carefully. Humans do not force our beliefs on others. We simply live according to what we believe is true. If that inspires others to think about sacrifice and love, then that is their choice. And if some species find that inspiration threatening, asked the Zephyrian, then we will respect their choice to avoid us, Jake replied. But we will not change who we are to make others comfortable. The representatives nodded, and Jake could see that they had expected this answer. That is exactly what we hoped you would say, Vexthari said. Humanity will continue to have full rights and privileges in galactic society. But we will also establish protocols for species that prefer not to interact with human culture. Voluntary separation, added the Morvani representative. Species that find human beliefs disturbing can limit their contact with human worlds and ships. But species that find human beliefs inspiring can engage as much as they want. Jake felt relief flooding through him. The Council will not exile humanity? The Council will embrace humanity, Speaker Hishtak said. But we will also protect the right of other species to avoid what they cannot understand. Vexthari stood up. Human Morrison, you came here to answer charges that your species was spreading dangerous doctrines. Instead, you have shown us that your species is spreading the most beautiful doctrine in the universe, that love is stronger than death. The 5 species that withdrew will eventually return, added the Zephyrian. When they are ready to face the truth about sacrifice and love, they will find their place in a galaxy that has learned to appreciate both safety and heroism. Jake stood up as well. What about the young people from other worlds who have been influenced by human culture? They will have the choice to follow their own path, the Morvani representative said. If they choose to embrace human values of sacrifice and love, that is their right. If they choose to remain with their own species' values of safety and preservation, that is also their right. Freedom of choice, Jake said. That is very human. It is also very galactic, Vexthari replied. The galaxy is big enough for many different beliefs about life, death, and love. As Jake prepared to leave the private chambers, Speaker Hishtak called out to him. Human Morrison, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Jake said. The child in the recording, the one who sang about being loved by someone who died. For her, does she understand what her song means? Jake smiled. She understands that she is loved. She understands that someone gave up everything for her. She may not understand all the implications of that, but she understands the most important part. And that is enough, Vexthari said quietly. That is enough to change a species. That is enough to change a galaxy. Jake left the private chambers with a light heart. The crisis was over. Humanity would keep its place in the galaxy. The species that could not accept human beliefs about sacrifice and love would have the space they needed to feel safe. The species that found inspiration in human beliefs would have the fray.